Satish, so if both of us, if we got hit by a blue bus tomorrow, would you and I survive?
That's a great thought to start with. I
Happy
don't know
thoughts.
if you and I will survive, but I think you and I will survive, and I think it will also thrive.
I agree. I think after maybe a couple of chaotic weeks of emergency calendar invites saying, let's figure this out, or I'm sure there will be some ChatGPT prompting of how do we run a NGO without its founders. I think after all of that, I'm sure the organization will find its way forward. Because you see so many founders stuck in this sort of cycle where they want to build a second line of leadership that can take over and run the org without them.
Yep.
But when they get hit by a blue bus, it's difficult because they don't know how to really build that second line. Right? Every manager also says that. For the thousands of managers we've worked with, they want to build a team where leaders come forth, where they're able to build the next generation of leaders. But when crisis hits, they go really into this doing mode, right? They move out of, hey, I want to build this next generation I want to manage this crisis to the next, into survival mindset. I think the question we want to ask today is really, how do we get leaders to get out of doer mode and really build and scale leaders and develop that second line of leadership? Let's talk about it. We've really seen the consequences of not building a second line of leadership, right? As founders, as managers, it doesn't pop up at your SWOT analysis or your strategy review, but it really hits you at midnight when you're burnt out, you're tired, and you still got another slide deck to make for tomorrow's 9 a.m. pitch.
Yeah.
We felt the burnout, we felt the bottleneck when our task list is longer than a Bangalore traffic jam, which is a big thing to say. And we've also felt the pain where a lot of your strong team members start to quietly quit. We felt this in so many different ways because no one wants to grow under a ceiling shaped like their manager or their founder.
Very true.
So the question, I think, is why do leaders struggle and what's really holding them back?
I think a great place to start is Jim Collins.
Mm.
Right? He obviously wrote this iconic book called Good to Great. And if you really look at the book, right, he and his research team, they looked at about 1,400 different companies which were on Fortune 500 for about 15 years. And through their research, they identified these 11 companies which were doing extremely well on all aspects. And then when they really looked into it and said, what separates these 11 companies from the rest of
What was their magic sauce?
Magic sauce, one of the key ingredients was leadership.
Mm.
Having great leaders. Jim Collins calls it level 5 leaders.
Yeah.
That is such a important thing to think about. If you just double click on that, what they realized was most of these leaders were homegrown. They didn't hire superstars from outside. They came from inside the ranks. They knew the culture, they understood the company, and they were really able to lead and live out the values. And when you think about this, when as leaders, when we don't realize that, hey, we want to build something great, but we can't do that unless we build great leaders. And when you think about the whole education system in India, it's a solo game. You go through your college and schooling in a very competitive mode. You get rewarded for being slightly better than the person next to you. So I walk in with that mindset. I may have this individual brilliance, but I don't have a playbook to collaborate and lead. And that creates a real crisis. So as founders, we really need to figure out how do we design to build and scale leadership. Otherwise, by default, it's going to be dysfunctional.
I love that. I think just building homegrown leaders is such a powerful concept, right? Because it's so much better than just, let me hire a management team or managers or just go find that next co-founder. Because you really want people who can share your vision. And because what is division? It's just two visions, right? And so people who we have taken that journey with you, it isn't just, hey, we met for coffee and let's figure this out. But if you can build a team of leaders who share your vision, share values of this is how we want to do life together, this is how we want to do work together, and that work ethic, that this is our expectations from each other, feel like magic happens there.
Very true.
Yeah, I think the question a lot of managers and leaders and founders have is they want to do it, but what does it take to really scale leadership?
I think there are two things. There are two levers if you really want to grow leadership. There are two levers. One is building the leadership engine by using systems. And the second is developing the leadership. Bain & Co. have this really good model. It's called leadership engine model. where they talk about how do you create that engine. So they talk about how you pick certain mindsets that you want in your leadership and certain behaviors. How do you embed that in your systems? From hiring processes to onboarding to promotion and reviews and etc. That's how you go about it. One good example of this is Google. They went on this trip, Project Oxygen, 2009, I think. What they wanted to do was they wanted to prove that you actually don't need leaders. Good teams.
Really?
Yeah, they said you don't need leaders. And they really wanted to prove that using data. And to their surprise, what they realized was the teams which had good leaders were doing extremely well compared to the other teams in every aspect. So they quickly pivoted. They said, okay, if leaders are important, how do we systemize it? So they looked at about 10,000 managers, years of data, their reviews and the feedback loops. They identified to start with 8 behaviors, then they extended to 10. And they embedded those into the system.
Nice.
Yeah, so right from their hiring, onboarding, their 360-degree reviews, the qualifiers for the promotion. So they went all out. It was revolutionary in some way, using the data to decode what leadership
Back
was.
then, for sure, yeah.
But let me tell you what the surprise is there. Right? They partially got it right, but they fell short.
How?
Because they built the system, but they didn't build the soul.
Wow, what a line.
Because say, when you think about leadership, right, like you can't just drive it with some metrics.
Yeah, you can't manufacture it, right?
Yeah, you can't just manufacture it. And somebody actually said this, one of the Google employees. He said, you can get 5 on 5 on oxygen metrics, but you can still be not a great human being to your team.
Ouch.
Yeah, and that really hurts. And that's showed up in where Google is really struggling when it comes to leadership. Because really think about it. Think about teachers, our parents. Can you really say that, hey, if you do these 8 behaviors, you're going to be an amazing parent or amazing teacher? Because these roles by default, when it comes to empowering others, uplifting others, growing others, it's not just some behaviors. It's so much to do with your identity. It's a very deep commitment. And that's where the second lever comes. Leadership development.
Nice.
Where you want to bring in those mindsets. You want to give them mental models. You want people to figure out what kind of leaders they want. And that's very important.
I love that, because as much as you put systems and processes, you will eventually replicate who you are. Because scaling leadership isn't just about promoting people, isn't just, hey, let me promote and train. That's a great way to not scale your team or not build leaders. It's like building a gym for your org. Can we build that leadership muscle in our org, that leadership language in our muscle, that this is how we lead? There are no shortcuts. For us, we know that it's not just a weekend offsite, that we put a few fancy post-its up, make a PPT, and we're all good. It takes so much more than that. It is years, months, weeks of really building that capacity within an organization. And just having done this at Change Plus with so many of our clients, with so many of our partners that we work with, we actually have been able to build and design that leadership pipeline for them. Because you want people to take that journey not just over 6 months, but over years. Because first-time managers, they're not ready for management in any way, shape, or form. They're still figuring out, how do I go from I'll do everything myself to please CC me on every email. They're still learning the ropes of management. How do I balance people, performance? How do I balance all these things? But they're the closest link to the ground. So they're critical. Yeah. So for us, I think we've been able to build strong programs that develop that first-time managers, give them a language for leadership. And then you go up the ranks, you've got to then do it also for your mid-level managers. Mid-level managers are like the middle child of leadership. They're ignored, they're overworked, they're beach ka bachu, like we used to play that game as kids. And they've got to figure out cross-functionality. What does it mean to work within teams, within departments, manage so many agendas? And then you have senior management. You've got to build a sort of structure of leadership that feels similar throughout, that language of leadership almost. Because senior management, they've mastered the basics, but then they've got to now lead with presence, not just with a PowerPoint. Leadership is then, like you're saying, a level 5 leader. I want to follow you because it's you. I don't want to follow you because you've got the right strategy or vision. Life is beyond that.
Very true.
So when you think of these 3 levels, right, you've got to meet each group where they're at, build them and take them forward and help them to build this universe within an organization And that's something we love doing. It's workshops, it's coaching, it's building real context, real workplace challenges, gamified challenges, all the things that we do when we work with our partners and build this for them. Because you want leadership for a Monday morning. You don't want just leadership to be your nice next LinkedIn post.
What you said is very true. I love what you said about building that language. I think for companies, it's very important to understand that when you as an organization talk about leadership, there should be a reference point. All of us have some idea of what leadership is, yeah. But when we have a shared idea of what leadership looks like here in this space? 3 legacy models, time tested, that we usually recommend. Number 1 is, and it's very useful for somebody who's starting off, 5 Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell. What a book and what a model. And when people understand that language at a very personal level, they understand what kind of leader I want to be. It's really good at that level. Then when it comes to team, how do I show up for the team? How do I lead the team? The framework that's very useful is Situational Leadership by Ken Blanch. When you really zoom out and say, hey, what kind of leaders we should be growing as an organization, then you've got Level 5 Leadership by Jim Collins that we talked about, good to great. And if you want to build something great, you've got to have great leaders. That's the essence of it.
Yeah. I think for founders, managers, leaders, just moving from, hey, I'm going to work in this team or in this org, to I'm going to work on it. I want to focus away from just the everyday to building that next generation leaders. If they can make that switch, and then maybe even work with us to help them make that switch and design that leadership pipeline, you'll build a culture of leadership within your organization. They're like, wow, this is great to have a team that can take U&I, whatever the organization is, forward. Because you want to scale it just beyond yourself. You want to build that organization of values.